"If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything," cried the CEO. But the janitor did it. The city was alive with the usual sounds of cars, voices, and business rushing around, but inside the large glass building that stood in the center of it all, a different kind of silence lived. It was not the silence of peace or calmness, but the silence of something missing. That silence came from the little girl who once filled the building and her home with laughter, songs, and endless questions. She was the only daughter of the city's most powerful CEO, a man who was known for his sharp mind, quick decisions, and ability to solve any problem thrown his way. But in the quiet of his own home, he had met a problem that no amount of money, no number of connections, and no influence could fix. His daughter had stopped speaking. She had been a cheerful child, the kind that could melt anyone's heart just by running into the room. Her eyes always sparkled when she told stories about her dolls, her school, or her dreams. She was the kind of child who would run up to strangers with a smile, who would ask questions that made adults laugh and think. But all of that changed one evening after an accident that left her shaken. It was not an accident that took her body's strength. She could still walk, play, and move as she always did. But it took away her voice. The first days were filled with hope. The CEO and his wife thought it was just the shock that kept her quiet. Doctors said it might be temporary, that with rest and love, her words would return. So, they waited. They filled her room with new toys, sang songs for her, told her bedtime stories, hoping she would join in again. But days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months. The little girl would move her lips sometimes, as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came. She began to avoid trying, her small hands clutching her toys more tightly, her eyes growing quieter with each passing day. The CEO had always believed that money could bring solutions. When a business faced a challenge, he hired the best minds. When a company needed saving, he invested the right amount at the right time. And so, with the same belief, he reached out to the best doctors across the country. Speech therapists, child psychologists, neurologists. No specialist was too far, no treatment too expensive. They ran tests, gave suggestions, and tried every known method. Machines beeped in hospital rooms, experts spoke in complicated words, and medicines were prescribed. Yet, his daughter stayed silent, sitting through the treatments with sad, tired eyes. The house that was once filled with giggles now felt heavy with quiet. The CEO's wife often sat by their daughter's side, reading books aloud, though she never got a response. Sometimes the girl would smile faintly, but it wasn't the same smile. It was weaker, more like a shadow of what it once was. The sound of her voice, which had been so ordinary and taken for granted before, now became the most precious thing in the world, something her parents would give anything to hear again. The CEO tried to hide his pain at work. In meetings, he appeared as strong as ever, his voice firm and his decisions sharp. But behind the closed doors of his office, he would often find himself staring at her picture on his desk. In that photo, she was laughing, her mouth wide open in joy, her eyes lit with life. He would sometimes whisper to the picture, "Come back, little one. Please speak again." One evening, after another failed therapy session, the CEO broke down. He held his daughter close, rocking her gently as if she were still a baby. He whispered promises into her ear that he would buy her anything she wanted, that he would take her to the most beautiful places, that he would make the whole world listen if only she would say a single word. But her silence remained. His frustration grew. He had always been the man with answers, but now he felt powerless. He shouted at doctors, slammed doors, and spent sleepless nights searching the internet for new methods. His wife begged him to calm down, reminding him that their daughter needed patience more than pressure. But patience was something the CEO had never truly learned. And yet, even in his anger, the desperation was born of love. His little girl meant everything to him. He remembered the night she was born, the first cry that had filled the hospital room. That sound had been the happiest moment of his life. Now, the absence of that sound haunted him. The more time passed, the more it seemed like the world had given up. Therapists said perhaps she needed time, perhaps she would never speak again. Teachers at her school suggested other forms of communication. Friends and colleagues, though sympathetic, slowly stopped asking about her progress. But the CEO could not give up. He told himself again and again that there had to be a way. Somewhere, somehow, someone could bring his daughter's voice back. One night, after pacing the floor of his office with tears burning in his eyes, he slammed his hand on the table and cried out, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything." His voice echoed in the room, bouncing off the walls. It was not a promise to anyone in particular, but more like a desperate cry to the universe. He was ready to hand over his wealth, his success, even his power, just for one small word from his daughter. But the universe stayed silent, just as his daughter did. And so, life continued in that quiet, heavy way. The girl still played with her dolls, but she did so quietly. The wife still read bedtime stories, though her heart broke a little more each night. And the CEO, despite all his strength and influence, found himself more helpless than he had ever been in his life. What no one knew then was that the answer would not come from doctors in white coats or from machines in hospitals. It would not come from money or power. It would come from someone the CEO had never even thought about, someone who walked past him every day, unnoticed. The janitor, with his worn-out uniform and tired hands, carried within him a gift the world had forgotten. And in time, he would be the one to break the silence. The seasons kept changing, but inside the CEO's home, time felt frozen. Each day began with hope and ended with disappointment. The little girl, though physically healthy, carried a silence so heavy that it spread into every corner of the house. Her parents tried to keep her life as normal as possible. She still went to school, though she hardly interacted with classmates. Teachers were kind, friends tried to include her in their games, but without her voice, she remained like a visitor in her own childhood. She would draw pictures instead of speaking, write small notes to communicate, and sometimes just sit quietly, watching others with longing in her eyes. Her father could not accept this as her fate. He felt every moment of silence as a personal defeat. He told himself that the world might give up, but he never would. He searched day and night for treatments, therapies, and methods used anywhere in the world. He called hospitals abroad, spoke to professors at universities, and invited experts to his home. His connections were wide, and his money limitless, so he left no stone unturned. At first, each new attempt filled him with excitement. A doctor from Europe suggested a new kind of therapy using sound vibrations. A team from America brought machines that scanned brain activity while showing the child pictures. A therapist from Japan came with a method that mixed play with speech. For a short while, hope would rise again. The girl would sit with them, sometimes trying, sometimes refusing. The CEO would stand nearby, watching every small movement as if his whole life depended on it. If her lips trembled as though she might make a sound, he would hold his breath, praying for a miracle. But when nothing happened, the hope would crash once again. The experts often left with polite explanations, some saying she only needed time, others saying her voice might never return. The CEO would shake their hands stiffly, sometimes losing his temper, shouting that he was paying them not for guesses but for results. Behind his anger was a breaking heart. At night, when everyone slept, he would sit in his study, looking at videos of his daughter from before the accident. In those videos, she danced in the living room, sang nursery songs, and shouted with joy while running in the garden. He would turn up the volume, closing his eyes, trying to remember every note of her laughter. The little girl, too, felt the weight of her silence. She was young, but she could see the sadness in her parents' eyes. Sometimes she tried to force sounds out, pushing her voice with effort, but nothing came. Tears would roll down her cheeks, and she would bury her face in her mother's lap. Her mother comforted her with soft hands, whispering, "It's okay, my love. You're perfect just the way you are." But the girl wanted more. She wanted to speak, to call her father's name again, to sing the songs she used to love. Inside her, the desire was strong, but her body betrayed her. The CEO's desperation grew to the point where it changed his personality. At work, he was no longer the calm and confident leader everyone admired. He became restless, impatient, snapping at employees over small mistakes. His colleagues whispered behind his back, wondering what had happened to him. Only a few close ones knew the truth, but even they could not fully understand the pain of a father whose child had gone silent. His wife tried to balance between caring for their daughter and calming her husband, but even she felt exhausted. Sometimes, she would cry alone, not wanting her husband or daughter to see her weakness. Months turned into a year, and the world outside continued moving. But for this family, life was divided into two parts: the time before silence and the time after. On the girl's birthday, the CEO arranged a grand celebration, hoping the joy of the day might spark something inside her. The house was filled with balloons, music, and children. Everyone sang the birthday song, and all eyes turned to the little girl, waiting for her to blow out the candles and say something. She leaned forward, blew gently, and gave a small smile, but no words followed. The children clapped, but the silence after the clapping made the parents' hearts ache. That night, after the party ended, the CEO stood by the window of his study, looking at the city lights. He felt small against the vast night sky. All his wealth, his buildings, his cars, his businesses, none of it could buy a single word from his daughter. In a moment of helplessness, he whispered, "Take everything from me, but give her voice back." His voice cracked, and tears finally fell, something he rarely allowed anyone to see. The girl, unaware of her father's late-night battles, continued to live in her quiet way. She developed her own world, where drawing became her language. Her notebooks filled with pictures of houses, gardens, birds, and sometimes pictures of herself with her parents. In many drawings, her mouth was open, as if she was speaking. It was her way of telling the world what she could not say with sound. Her parents cherished those drawings, though each one was a painful reminder of what was missing. The CEO's promise, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything," began to spread among those who knew him. It wasn't a formal announcement, but he had said it so many times, in meetings, in conversations, even in front of strangers, that people began repeating it. Some thought it was an exaggeration, others thought it was madness, but to him, it was the pure truth. He was ready to give away his fortune, his company, even his title, if only his daughter could return to him with her voice. But despite all the efforts, the silence remained. The CEO began to feel that the world had no answer. He was a man used to controlling outcomes, yet this was the one thing slipping out of his hands. His wife begged him to stop chasing new treatments and to let their daughter heal in her own way. But he could not stop. Every time he saw her playing silently with her dolls, every time he watched her try to join conversations with only gestures, his heart screamed for a solution. Still, life had a strange way of preparing answers from unexpected places. While the CEO searched the world for brilliance, the key to his daughter's voice was quietly sweeping the halls of his building every night. The janitor, an old man in a faded uniform, went unnoticed by most. He cleaned the offices after long hours, pushed his cart through silent corridors, and left before anyone important arrived in the morning. No one knew his story, and no one asked. To them, he was invisible. But inside him lived a past full of knowledge and patience, the very things the CEO's daughter needed. And soon, fate would bring the janitor and the little girl. The tall glass building where the CEO worked was always filled with movement. During the day, businessmen in suits rushed from one meeting to another, Secretaries carried files, phones rang without pause, and every corner of the building seemed to shout with activity. But late in the evening, when the offices emptied and the lights dimmed, the building grew quiet. It was during those silent hours that the janitor did his work. He was an old man with kind eyes and slow but steady steps. His uniform was worn, and his hands were rough from years of labor. He never spoke much, but there was a calmness about him that people felt when he passed by. To most, he was invisible, a shadow that pushed a cart of cleaning supplies and swept the floors no one cared about. But inside him lived memories of another life. Long ago, before hardship forced him to take this job, he had been a teacher. He had worked with children who found learning difficult, children who needed extra care and patience. He had taught them how to read slowly, how to sing simple songs, and how to express themselves when words did not come easily. It was a part of his past he never shared, but it was a part that had shaped who he was. One evening, as he was cleaning near the CEO's office, he noticed a little girl sitting quietly on the couch in the corner of the room. She had a doll in her lap and was tracing circles on the floor with her finger. Her eyes seemed lost in thought, far away from the world around her. The janitor paused for a moment, leaning on his broom. He recognized her immediately. She was the CEO's daughter, the girl whose silence everyone in the building had heard about. He had seen her a few times before, walking beside her father, always quiet, never speaking. The janitor didn't want to disturb her, so he went back to his work, humming softly as he swept the floor. He had a habit of humming old songs to himself while working, tunes from a time when life had been lighter. After a few minutes, he noticed the girl looking at him curiously. Her eyes followed the rhythm of his humming, and for the first time that day, her lips curved into a small smile. The janitor's heart softened. He gave her a gentle nod and continued his work, pretending not to notice her attention. The next day, when he came again in the evening, she was there once more. This time, she had crayons and paper. As he swept, he whistled a little melody, and to his surprise, she began drawing lines in rhythm with the sound. He slowed his steps to match her strokes, and she laughed softly without making a sound. That laugh, though voiceless, was brighter than anything he had heard in a long time. He felt something stir inside him, a sense of connection that went beyond words. From then on, he made it a habit to interact with her in small ways. He would draw simple smiley faces on scraps of paper and leave them where she could find them. She would respond by drawing her own faces, sometimes with long hair, sometimes with big eyes. They began to build a silent language together, a game that belonged only to them. The janitor never pushed her, never forced her to speak. He simply gave her kindness, patience, and time. The CEO noticed his daughter's interest in the janitor one evening when he walked into the office and saw her holding up a paper where the janitor had drawn a cat. She pointed to it, then pointed to herself, then to her father, trying to tell a story through gestures. The CEO was surprised. His daughter rarely opened herself to strangers, yet here she was, laughing quietly with a man she barely knew. At first, the CEO was uncomfortable. How could a janitor, someone with no degree in medicine or therapy, connect with his daughter when highly trained experts had failed? But when he saw her smile, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, he could not deny the warmth it brought to his heart. The bond between the janitor and the girl grew stronger with each passing day. He began to teach her little tricks to use her voice without pressure. He would hum a sound and gesture for her to copy it, not with words, but with humming or soft breathing. At first, she only giggled at his funny faces, but slowly, she began to join in. One day, while he hummed a silly tune, she pressed her lips together and let out the faintest sound. It was not a word, not even clear, but it was something. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she clapped her hands, thrilled at what she had just done. The janitor nodded encouragingly, as if to say, "Yes, you can." The girl began to look forward to the evenings when the janitor worked. She would wait with her crayons, her papers, and sometimes even her dolls, ready for their little games. The janitor taught her to use singing as play. He would sing la, la, la in different pitches, making her laugh, and gently encouraged her to try. She struggled, but every tiny sound she managed gave her more courage. Unlike the doctors, who came with machines and instructions, the janitor gave her freedom. There was no pressure, no fear of failure, only fun. The CEO and his wife started noticing changes in their daughter. She seemed brighter, more lively. She no longer avoided eye contact and sometimes even tugged at their sleeves, showing them the drawings she made with the janitor. Though she still had not spoken a full word, her world was beginning to open again. The mother, touched by this change, one evening approached the janitor with gratitude in her eyes. She whispered, "Thank you for being kind to her." The janitor only smiled humbly and replied, "Children need patience more than anything." The CEO remained cautious. He still believed that professional help was necessary, but deep down, he could not ignore the progress. One night, he stood quietly in the corner of the office, watching the janitor and his daughter. The janitor was pretending to be a bird, flapping his arms and whistling, while the girl laughed silently and waved her arms like wings. Suddenly, she let out a small sound, a soft "ah." The CEO froze. His heart leaped as though someone had given him the greatest gift in the world. The janitor looked at the girl and clapped gently, encouraging her. She laughed again, this time with another faint sound escaping her lips. The CEO's eyes filled with tears. It was the first time in years that he had heard even the smallest sound from his daughter. It wasn't a word yet, but it was a beginning. He walked forward, knelt beside her, and whispered, "You can do it, my love." She looked at him, smiled, and pressed her lips together, trying again. The janitor gave her a thumbs up, and she giggled, attempting another small sound. That night, the CEO could not sleep. For the first time in years, hope burned brightly in his heart. He realized that the miracle he had been searching for might not come from doctors in expensive suits or from machines with flashing lights. It might come from a man in a worn-out uniform, armed only with kindness and patience. He remembered his desperate words, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything." He had meant them with all his heart, but he had never imagined that the one to answer that cry would be a janitor. The girl's journey was far from over, but a small door had opened, and through it came light. The janitor had touched her heart in a way no one else could, and in doing so, had given her the courage to try again. The days that followed were unlike any the family had seen in years. For the first time, there was a tiny sound in their home that broke the silence. It was not yet a clear word, but it was a beginning. The faint hums and little ah sounds from the girl were like treasures, giving hope to everyone who loved her. The janitor, who had been nothing more than a shadow in the building, suddenly became the light in their daughter's life. Every evening, after finishing his cleaning tasks, he would spend time with her. Their bond grew naturally, without force, without pressure. He always carried with him an air of patience, as if he had all the time in the world. While others had come with complicated treatments and hurried methods, he brought only gentleness and small games. Those games slowly unlocked the courage inside her. One evening, he placed 2 cups on the table and tapped on them like drums. The girl's eyes lit up. She picked up pencils and began tapping along. He made a funny face and hummed a tune while tapping, then gestured for her to try. She pressed her lips together and let out a soft mmm. It was barely there, but the sound made her clap for herself in delight. The janitor clapped too, his smile wide, his eyes shining with encouragement. The CEO stood at a distance, watching the scene with wonder. It was a small step, but to him, it was greater than any success he had achieved in business. The janitor began using simple songs to help her practice. He would sing short phrases, repeating the same sounds again and again. La, 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 he sang slowly, stretching the sounds so she could follow. At first, she only laughed at the funny way he sang, but then she started moving her lips along with him. Sometimes a faint sound came out, sometimes not, but each attempt was progress. She began to enjoy it, no longer afraid of failure. She would clap for herself, laugh when the janitor made silly mistakes, and try again. Her mother noticed the change in her daughter's eyes. They no longer looked tired or distant. Instead, they carried sparks of excitement, a new kind of energy. She began drawing less of silent faces and more of smiling ones with wide open mouths. In her small way, she was expressing her dream of speaking again. Her parents kept those drawings safe, each one a symbol of her courage. The CEO, who had once demanded instant results, learned to slow down. Watching the janitor and his daughter taught him the power of patience. He began sitting quietly during their sessions, no longer pacing the room or showing frustration. Instead, he clapped along, laughed at the silly games, and gave his daughter hugs after each little achievement. It was a new side of him, one his employees would have never recognized. One particular evening marked a turning point. The janitor brought with him a small harmonica. He blew into it, creating simple notes, and handed it to the girl. At first, she giggled, unsure what to do. But with his guidance, she placed it to her lips and blew gently. A faint note came out, surprising her. She laughed, and then she tried again. The harmonica became her new favorite toy, teaching her how to use her breath, how to push air through her throat, and how to create sound without fear. Each note, though not a word, was like a little victory. The janitor never asked for anything in return. He never boasted, never expected rewards. To him, helping the girl was natural, almost as if he had been waiting for this purpose all along. The CEO, humbled, began to look at him with deep respect. He realized that true wisdom and kindness did not always wear expensive suits or sit in tall offices. Sometimes, it wore a faded uniform and carried a broom. As weeks turned into months, the girl's progress became clearer. She no longer avoided trying. She hummed along with tunes, laughed with small sounds, and even whispered faint syllables. One evening, when her father came home late, she ran to him and pressed her lips together. For a moment, she hesitated, but then a soft sound escaped. "Pa." It was not complete, but it was enough. The CEO froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. His heart raced as tears filled his eyes. He knelt down, holding her close, whispering, "Say it again, my love." She tried again, this time making a sound closer to Papa. The word was broken, but to him, it was the sweetest sound in the world. From that day forward, the house felt alive again. Every small sound the girl made filled the rooms with joy. Her mother often recorded them, playing them back again and again as if they were precious music. The CEO found himself smiling more, laughing more, and spending time with his daughter in ways he had once been too busy to do. But none of this would have been possible without the janitor. He continued to guide her gently, step by step. He never rushed her, never compared her to others. He treated each sound, each attempt, as a great success. He told her stories in animated voices, acting them out so she would feel encouraged to join. Sometimes, she whispered along with him, copying his tones. Other times, she only listened, but even then, her eyes shone with happiness. The CEO often thought about the promise he had made in his moments of despair, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything." He had said it with all his heart, believing only great experts could achieve such a miracle. Yet here was a humble janitor, doing what no doctor had done, not with wealth or knowledge, but with kindness and patience. The CEO felt both gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for the miracle happening before his eyes, and guilt for not realizing earlier that sometimes answers come from the simplest of places. One evening, after a long session of singing and humming, the girl turned to her mother and softly whispered, "Mama." It was the first time in years she had spoken the word. Her mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She embraced her daughter tightly, unable to believe the moment she had waited for had finally arrived. The janitor, standing quietly nearby, smiled gently, his eyes glistening with quiet pride. The CEO stood speechless, his heart overflowing. In that moment, he knew his life had changed forever. His daughter's voice, even in its fragile beginnings, was worth more than every fortune he had built. He looked at the janitor and whispered, "You have given us back our world." The janitor simply bowed his head, replying softly, "She did it herself. All I did was listen." The journey was not yet over, but the silence had been broken. The girl's voice had returned, piece by piece, like a song slowly finding its melody again. And every day, with the janitor by her side, that song grew stronger. The house that had once been filled with heavy silence was now alive with sound again. Every morning, the parents woke to the sweetest gift they could imagine, their daughter's small but clear voice. At first, she spoke only single words, whispering "Mama," "Papa," or naming her dolls and toys. But with each passing week, her voice grew stronger, her words clearer. Laughter returned, not just in smiles or gestures, but in sound, the music of childhood filling the air once more. The janitor, who had quietly become her teacher, continued visiting her after his duties. He guided her gently, never rushing, always encouraging. He turned their lessons into play, making her laugh while practicing words. Sometimes, he would pretend to forget how to pronounce a word, and she would correct him, giggling. Other times, he told her funny stories, encouraging her to repeat small phrases after him. With every game, every song, and every story, she regained her voice step by step. The CEO watched this transformation with amazement. His daughter, who had been silent for so long, now ran around the house calling for him. The sound of "Papa" echoing through the hallways was something he had once thought he would never hear again. Each time she said it, his eyes filled with tears. For a man who had conquered businesses, built empires, and been feared in boardrooms, nothing compared to this simple joy. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the girl climbed onto her father's lap and, with a proud smile, said a full sentence, "Papa, I love you." The CEO froze, his heart pounding as though he had just heard the most powerful speech of his life. He hugged her tightly, unable to speak for a moment, tears streaming down his cheeks. His wife sobbed softly beside him, her hands clasped together in gratitude. The janitor stood quietly in the corner, watching the scene with gentle eyes, his heart swelling with pride. The CEO remembered the desperate cry he had once made, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything." Now, it was no longer just words. He meant it with every beat of his heart. The next day, he called the janitor into his office. For the first time, the janitor walked into the grand room not to clean, but to sit across from the most powerful man in the building. The CEO looked at him with deep respect and said, "You have done what no doctor, no specialist, no amount of money could do. You gave my daughter her voice back. I promised I would give everything to the one who could do that, and I intend to keep my promise." He opened a file on his desk and slid it across. Inside were papers transferring a large sum of money, enough to make the janitor richer than he had ever dreamed. Along with it was an offer of a beautiful house and a lifetime of financial security. But the janitor looked down at the papers, then looked back up with calm eyes. He smiled gently and shook his head. "Sir, I don't need these things. I didn't help your daughter for money. I helped her because she needed someone to listen, someone to be patient. That is all I wanted to give." The CEO was stunned. "But you could live in comfort for the rest of your life." You don't have to work another day. Why refuse? The janitor's voice was soft but firm. Comfort doesn't come from money alone. For me, comfort is knowing that a little girl who once lived in silence now laughs and speaks again. That is reward enough. You have already given me more than I ever expected. Her smile. The CEO felt a deep humility wash over him. All his life, he had believed that everything had a price, that every problem could be solved with wealth. But sitting in front of him was a man who proved otherwise. He realized that some of the most valuable things in life, kindness, patience, love, could not be bought. They could only be given freely. Still, the CEO wanted to do something to honor the janitor. After much thought, he said, "If you will not take wealth for yourself, then allow me to do something meaningful in your name." With the janitor's quiet approval, the CEO set up a foundation to help children with speech difficulties. He used his money to build centers where children could receive therapy, not just with machines and treatments, but with kindness and creativity, the way the janitor had taught his daughter. He named the foundation after the janitor, making sure the world knew his story. When the first center opened, the janitor stood beside the CEO, uncomfortable with the attention but smiling nonetheless. Parents brought their children, some shy, some struggling, all hopeful. The janitor bent down to greet them with the same warmth he had once shown the CEO's daughter. The girl herself stood proudly at the event, holding her father's hand and saying clearly into the microphone, "Thank you." Her voice, though small, carried more power than the loudest speech. Everyone in the room clapped, some with tears in their eyes. The janitor continued his simple life, still working with quiet dignity, still humming tunes as he swept the halls. But now, wherever he went, people looked at him with respect, no longer seeing just a janitor, but the man who had given a child back her voice. The CEO often visited him, not as a boss, but as a friend. Sometimes, they would sit together in silence, sharing tea, both men grateful for the strange way life had brought them together. The girl grew stronger with time. Her voice returned fully, and she became known for her cheerful chatter once again. She often told people about her friend with the broom who had taught her to sing again. She never forgot the kindness that had changed her life, and whenever she saw the janitor, she would run to him, calling his name with joy. For the CEO, the experience changed him forever. He became softer, more patient, not only as a father but also as a leader. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke. To his employees, he was no longer just a strict figure of authority but a man who understood the value of compassion. He often told the story of his daughter and the janitor, reminding everyone that greatness is not found in wealth or titles, but in the ability to care for others. In the end, the CEO's desperate cry, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything," was answered, but not in the way he had imagined. He did not lose his fortune or his company, but he gained something far greater: wisdom. He learned that true treasures cannot be bought or sold. They live in patience, kindness, and the willingness to see value in those the world often overlooks. And so, the story that began with silence ended with voices: his daughter's sweet voice filling their home, the laughter of children at the new centers, and the quiet wisdom of a janitor who had once been invisible but became unforgettable. White heavy check mark word count, 1315.